Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator Metz, for bringing this bill forward. My name is Alex West. I'm from South Coast Fair Housing, the organization that put forward the report that Senator Metz was referring to. So we're a nonprofit organization. We've got offices in Pawtucket and also New Bedford, Massachusetts. And our mission is to promote fair housing practices and really to ensure equal housing opportunities for everyone. So I'd just like to say that South Coast strongly supports this bill. We have experience enforcing this comparable state law in Massachusetts, which has been in place since 1971, as I think has been mentioned earlier. So that law is really very similar substantively to Senator Metz's proposal. And in our work, we see how those protections help individual tenants and overall create a fairer and healthier housing market. So I'd like to briefly highlight the research report that was mentioned that South Coast released last year with assistance from students at Hope. I've included a short summary in my written comments, so feel free to review those. The report is called It's About the Voucher, Source of Income Discrimination in Rhode Island. And it presents our research into exactly how much discrimination Rhode Island voucher recipients encounter on the local rental market. So anecdotally, we know that these tenants experience very high rejection rates when trying to find an apartment, right? But we wanted more specific data on the scale of the obstacles. So our research had two phases. In the first phase, we looked online. So we looked at Craigslist, online advertisements to see what percentage included discriminatory content. Next, we called a subset of the housing providers who had advertised units online in order to see whether test callers posing as a tenant with a voucher would be allowed to submit an application. And so ultimately, we found that cost and discrimination combined excluded voucher holders from 93% of local housing opportunities statewide. Tenants with a voucher should have been able to afford more than a third of the units that are there, right? We know that a voucher isn't going to pay for a fancy, condominium unit, but voucher holders should be able to afford more than a third of the units. But they were denied the chance to even submit an application in all but 7% of instances. So they couldn't even get through the door solely because of their source of income. So really the takeaway that I would kind of leave is that income-based discrimination is a widespread problem in Rhode Island, and many tenants would benefit from the protections in this bill because many are experiencing discrimination as an obstacle to safe and decent rental housing. As far as some of the concerns that Senator Bell raised, and I agree with your enthusiasm for wanting a good bill, but I just want to say in this legislation, lawful source of income is clearly defined. It's even more closely defined than like military status or familial statuses in the law. We believe that defining lawful source of income to include particular kinds of income indicates an intent to protect individuals receiving those types of income from negative treatment and not to deny them any preference that a housing provider may wish to extend to them. You'll note that landlords are not penalized or prosecuted for saying that they welcome military members or veterans. This legislation supports those who have been historically segregated against. And actually spoke with the Rhode Island Commissioner for Human Rights earlier, and they are not aware of any complaints filed about a housing provider who's expressing a preference for someone based on military status. So when we have a similar neutral law, we're not seeing those being brought. Our reading of the legislation is that the legislation will not impact the ability of housing providers to affirmatively welcome voucher holders, right? We don't see that as being an issue. So I'll leave it at that, but happy to field any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony, especially emphasis on neutral law, which is the whole point that I was making earlier. Thank you. Spot on. Any questions for this witness? Yes, Senator Dela Cruz.
Thank you. So you were saying that the applicants were not allowed to submit an application. Was that because the landlord was not Section 8 approved, or because he simply didn't want Section 8?
Sure. So there's without getting too much into the weeds, there's generally no Section 8 approval. Like a house or an apartment doesn't magically become Section 8 approved. Each time a tenant with a voucher moves in, the unit will be inspected, right? So what was happening is these tenants or our callers posing as tenants weren't even allowed to submit an application once they said, oh, will you accept a voucher? That process stopped. So they weren't allowed to submit, information about maybe their good credit or their positive rental history. It didn't go on any further than, oh, I have a voucher. Nope.
Senator Dela Cruz.
So the process goes like this. I apply, I let them know that I have Section 8, then Section 8 would come to the rental unit, inspect it. If it didn't meet the qualifications or check every box off, then the landlord would be notified what needs to be rectified in the unit, comply with those, and then the tenant would be able to assume.
Exactly.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for this witness? Thank you all very much.